Caleb Weston didn't have time for distractions. As the youngest self-made millionaire in New York's cutthroat finance scene, his schedule was airtight, his focus unshakable. But as he stood in his towering glass-walled office, glaring at the stack of resumes on his desk, he realized he needed something, or rather, someone fast. His last personal assistant had quit unexpectedly, and now his world was unraveling at the seams. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, running a hand through his dark, perfectly styled hair. "I don't have time to interview 100 people." His best friend and business partner, Derek, leaned against the desk with a smirk. "Then hire the first competent one who walks through that door." As if on cue, a soft knock sounded and a woman stepped inside. She was not what Caleb had expected. For one, she wasn't wearing the usual stiff, corporate attire of his past assistants. Instead, she wore a simple black pencil skirt and a white blouse, the sleeves rolled up as if she was ready to work. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, and her hazel eyes sharp, observant met his with a confidence that threw him off guard. "I'm Olivia Carter," she said, chin lifted. "Here for the assistant position." Caleb exchanged a glance with Derek, who raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Interesting." "You don't have much corporate experience," Caleb noted, scanning her resume. "I learn fast," Olivia shot back. "And I'm organized, hardworking, and I won't quit when you throw impossible tasks at me." Caleb studied her. She wasn't intimidated by him. That was rare. "Fine, you're hired." "Start now," her lips parted slightly, "just like that." "I don't have time to waste," Caleb said, already turning toward his desk. "You'll learn on the job." "Derek will show you to your office." Olivia blinked but recovered quickly. "All right, see you soon, boss." As she walked out, Derek let out a low whistle. "She's got fire." Caleb ignored him and focused on his work. Olivia Carter was just another employee, nothing more. The problem was Olivia was good, too good. Within days, she had his schedule running smoother than ever. She anticipated his needs before he even voiced them. She handled last-minute crises with a calm efficiency that impressed even his toughest clients. And worst of all, she was everywhere. "Drink this," she said one evening, placing a steaming cup of coffee on his desk. He barely glanced up. "I didn't ask for, you didn't have to," she interrupted. "You've been rubbing your temples for the past hour. Caffeine helps." He stared at her, then at the coffee. Begrudgingly, he took a sip. It was perfect. "Thanks," he muttered. She smirked. "That's what you hired me for." And then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of vanilla and something else, something undeniably her. Caleb shook his head. This was dangerous. He didn't mix business with personal, ever. The problem with rules. They were meant to be broken. 3 weeks into her job, Olivia had become indispensable. And Caleb was noticing things he shouldn't. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought. The way she bit her lip when she concentrated. The way her laughter, rare but warm, lingered in a room long after she had left. And then came the gala. It was a high-profile charity event, and as his assistant, Olivia was required to attend. She had been professional all evening, handling introductions, managing schedules, keeping everything in line. But Caleb couldn't stop staring at her. She wore a sleek, emerald green gown that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her hair was in soft waves, and her usual confident, no-nonsense expression had been replaced by something softer. "You're staring," Derek muttered under his breath. Caleb dragged his gaze away. "I'm not," Derek chuckled. "Keep telling yourself that." By the time the event ended, Caleb was restless. Olivia had been charming, efficient, everything a perfect assistant should be. But when they stepped outside into the cool night air, something changed. "Long night," Olivia sighed, rubbing her arms. Without thinking, Caleb shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She froze. "You didn't have to, I know," he said, his voice lower than he intended. For a moment they just stood there, the city buzzing around them. Then Olivia cleared her throat. "I should go." Caleb nodded, watching as she disappeared into a waiting car. He exhaled sharply. This was bad, very bad. Because for the first time in years, Caleb Weston wanted something he couldn't have. Caleb wasn't a man who made reckless decisions. Every move he made was calculated, every risk measured. But lately, his thoughts were anything but rational, and they all led back to one person: Olivia. She had become an anchor in his life, steady and unshakable. She kept his world running with precision. Yet somehow, she was also the one thing disrupting his carefully built control. He had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize, but with her, it was becoming impossible. The shift had been slow, almost imperceptible. It wasn't just that she was good at her job. It was the way she carried herself, the confidence in her stride, the way she met challenges head-on without hesitation. She commanded respect without demanding it, and that was rare. Caleb had spent years surrounded by people who only saw him for what he could offer: his power, his wealth, the doors he could open for them. Olivia was different. She spoke to him like he was just a man, not someone to impress, not someone to chase. And that was dangerous. Because the more he was around her, the more he wanted to know what it would be like if she saw him as something more. It started with small things, moments that should have been insignificant, but weren't. Like the morning they were in the office before dawn, preparing for a high-stakes investor meeting. Olivia handed him a folder, their fingers brushing for the briefest second. The contact was nothing, barely a touch, but Caleb felt it like a spark igniting a line of gasoline. She didn't react, at least not outwardly, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. Neither of them acknowledged it. Then there was the business trip, a last-minute deal in Chicago. They arrived late in the evening, exhausted but still needing to prepare. The hotel suite had 2 separate bedrooms, but they worked in the shared living space, papers spread out across the glass coffee table. At some point, Olivia stretched, rolling her shoulders, and Caleb found himself watching her. She caught his gaze and raised an eyebrow. "Thinking about firing me yet?" she teased, breaking the tension. "Not even close," he admitted. She smiled, and for a moment it was just them. No work, no titles, no responsibilities. Just them. He should have walked away then, should have reminded himself of the lines he refused to cross. But he didn't. The moment everything changed, though, was the night of the unexpected downpour. They had been at a late meeting across town, and by the time they stepped outside, the sky had opened up, rain pouring in thick sheets. Olivia groaned. Of course. Perfect timing. Caleb glanced at the street. Their driver was still minutes away, and there was no shelter nearby. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, pulling her under the awning of a closed cafe. She looked up at him, water dripping from her hair, her blouse clinging slightly from the dampness. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and for a second, everything else faded. She was close, too close. His pulse hammered as he forced himself to step back, to loosen his grip on her wrist. But even as he let go, the imprint of her skin burned into his. They stood there in silence, the rain pounding around them, the air thick with something neither of them dared name. Then finally the car arrived. The moment was gone. But Caleb knew something had shifted, and there was no going back. Caleb was drowning. Not in work he could handle that. Not in stress he thrived on it. No, this was something far worse. He was drowning in thoughts of Olivia. It had been weeks since that night in the rain, and nothing had been the same since. She still handled his schedule with ruthless efficiency, still deflected his sharp remarks with even sharper wit. But now, there was something else pulsing beneath every interaction, something unspoken but undeniable. It was in the way her breath hitched when he stood too close. In the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. In the way every conversation felt like it was teetering on the edge of something neither of them could afford to acknowledge. Caleb knew himself. He was disciplined, controlled always. But Olivia was unraveling him one moment at a time, and the worst part? He wasn't sure he wanted to stop her. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were never dramatic. They were ordinary, predictable, the kind of day Caleb relied on to keep his life in order. But this Tuesday was different. It started with a meeting, one that should have been routine. Olivia sat beside him as always, taking notes, handling logistics. But halfway through, something shifted. The client, an older man with too much money and not enough manners, kept directing his comments toward Olivia. Not in a professional way, but in a way that made Caleb's blood boil. At first, Olivia ignored it, her expression carefully neutral. But when the man leaned in too far, his smile too familiar, Caleb saw her shoulders tense. Something inside him snapped. The words were out before he could stop them, his voice dangerously calm. "This meeting is over." The client blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Caleb said, standing. "We won't be doing business together," the man scoffed. "You're seriously throwing away this deal over?" Caleb's glare cut him off. A beat of silence. Then the man huffed, gathering his papers with a grumble before stalking out. As soon as the door clicked shut, Olivia exhaled sharply. "Caleb," he turned to her, muscles tight. "Don't." But she wasn't angry, she wasn't flustered. She was watching him with something unreadable in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." Another silence stretched between them, heavier than before. Then, finally, Olivia shook her head, a small, almost disbelieving smile playing at her lips. "Thank you." And just like that, Caleb knew he was in far deeper than he had ever meant to be. Avoiding her after that was impossible. Not that he didn't try. He buried himself in work, kept conversations strictly professional, refused to let his thoughts wander. But it didn't matter. Because Olivia was always there, slipping into his world effortlessly, making herself impossible to ignore. And then came the gala. Another event, another night of forced smiles and business deals disguised as small talk. Caleb had been to hundreds of these, they all blurred together. But not this one. Because this time, Olivia was by his side. And this time, when she walked into the ballroom wearing a midnight blue dress that hugged her in ways that made his throat go dry, Caleb knew he was past the point of no return. Not that he let it show. He kept his distance, played the part of the untouchable businessman, but it was a losing battle. Especially when Olivia leaned in to whisper something, her voice sending electricity down his spine. Especially when their hands brushed, and she didn't pull away. Especially when, as the night wore on, he realized he was no longer thinking about business at all. He was thinking about her, only her, and he didn't know how to stop. Caleb had never felt this kind of frustration before, not in business, not in life, not even in the high-stakes world that he had conquered long ago. But this was something else entirely. He wasn't a man who second-guessed himself. He made decisions, stuck to them, and didn't look back. That was how he built his empire, how he became the youngest self-made millionaire in New York. But when it came to Olivia, that certainty crumbled. Because every time he thought he had himself under control, she did something small, something effortless, and he was right back where he started. Like now. They were in his office late at night, the city lights casting a soft glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Olivia sat across from him, flipping through contracts, her focus razor-sharp. She had a habit of biting the inside of her cheek when she was deep in concentration. And Caleb had to force himself to look away before he did something incredibly stupid. The air between them had been charged for weeks, ever since that gala, ever since that night in the rain. They had both been dancing around it, pretending nothing had changed when everything had. He should have let it be. But Caleb Weston was never good at ignoring things that mattered. Olivia. Her pen stilled over the paper at the way he said her name low, controlled, but edged with something else. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his. Yes. 100 thoughts raced through his mind, but for once, he abandoned logic. Come here. She hesitated, searching his face for something, but then slowly, carefully she rose from her chair and walked toward him. When she stopped just in front of him, Caleb stood too, closing the space between them. He wasn't thinking about the consequences anymore. He wasn't thinking about rules. He was thinking about how long he had wanted this. How long he had wanted her. And then, before either of them could talk themselves out of it, he reached for her, pulling her against him. The moment their lips met, everything else ceased to exist. It wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was fire meeting fire, a collision of everything they had been holding back for far too long. Olivia's hands slid up his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt as if she needed something to hold on to. Caleb deepened the kiss, his hand tangling in her hair, tilting her head just right. It was madness, it was reckless, and it was the most right thing he had ever done. When they finally pulled apart, their breaths mingling in the space between them, Olivia's eyes searched his. This is a mistake, she whispered, but there was no conviction behind it. No, Caleb murmured, brushing his thumb along her jaw. This is inevitable, she swallowed, her pulse fluttering beneath his touch. We work together. We can handle it. Caleb, he silenced her with another kiss, softer this time, slower. I don't care about the rules, he admitted against her lips. I care about you. Something flickered in her expression, something vulnerable, something real. For the first time in his life, Caleb Weston wasn't chasing power, wasn't chasing success. He was chasing her, and he wasn't going to stop. Caleb wasn't a man who let emotions dictate his decisions, but Olivia had shattered that rule the moment she walked into his life. Now, standing in his penthouse with her, the city stretched out beneath them like a glittering sea. He knew there was no turning back. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, the heat from their kiss still lingering. Olivia had stepped away, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was thinking, calculating the risks, the consequences. He knew that look. He had worn it himself too many times. But Caleb wasn't afraid of risks, not with her. She exhaled sharply, finally meeting his gaze. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the push and pull between what she wanted and what she thought she should do. Then something shifted. She reached for him, fingers curling around the front of his shirt, pulling him back to her. The hesitation was gone. The moment their lips met again, it wasn't reckless, it was deliberate, a choice. One that neither of them intended to undo. Caleb's hands rested at her waist, anchoring her to him. He wasn't sure how long they stood there, lost in each other, but eventually Olivia broke away, her breath unsteady. We need to talk, she murmured. He nodded, stepping back but not too far. I know. Olivia ran a hand through her hair, pacing slightly. This changes everything. He leaned against the counter, watching her. Does it? She shot him a look. Of course it does. You're my boss, Caleb. This isn't just some casual thing. He folded his arms, his expression firm. I never said it was. That made her pause. He stepped closer again, careful, measured. You think I make impulsive decisions? She hesitated. No. Then understand this, he said, his voice low, certain. I know exactly what I'm doing. Her gaze searched his as if trying to find the catch, but there wasn't one. Finally, she let out a breath, nodding slightly. Okay. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough. For now. The days following that night changed everything. They still worked together, still operated with the same efficiency, but now there was something else beneath the surface. A shared secret. A charged undercurrent in every glance, every brush of hands, every stolen moment behind closed doors. but with it came the danger of exposure. Whispers started in the office small, barely noticeable at first. The way Caleb's eyes lingered a little too long. The way Olivia seemed to know what he needed before he even asked. Then came the questions. Derek was the first to bring it up. "You're different lately," he remarked, watching Caleb from across his desk. Caleb didn't look up from his laptop. "Am I?" Derek's smirk was knowing. "Don't play dumb, I know you." Caleb finally met his gaze. "And," Derek leaned back, studying him. "And I think you're playing with fire." Caleb's jaw tightened. "It's none of your business." Derek raised his hands in surrender. "Hey, I'm just saying, office romances. They get messy." Caleb's expression didn't waver. "This isn't just some office romance." Derek's smirk disappeared. "Then that's even more dangerous." Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because he already knew that. The real test came at the next gala. It was another high-profile event, another night of networking and calculated conversations. But this time, Caleb saw the way eyes followed Olivia when she entered the room. The way men took notice. She was stunning in a deep red gown, her confidence effortless. She wasn't just his assistant tonight, she was a force of her own, and he wasn't the only one who saw it. He stayed close, but not too close. They had agreed to keep things professional in public. No unnecessary risks. But then a man approached her. A businessman. Caleb recognized someone too charming for his own good. The man leaned in, smiling, speaking in low tones. Olivia laughed, not the way she did when she was truly amused, but the polite, distant kind. Caleb knew the difference. Still, something twisted inside him. He didn't interrupt, he let it play out. But when Olivia glanced toward him, as if instinctively seeking him out, something passed between them. Without a word, she excused herself and walked toward him. Caleb didn't move, didn't betray anything, but when she reached him, her voice was low. "You're jealous." It wasn't a question. He took a sip of his whiskey, his expression unreadable. "Observant," she smirked. "You don't need to be." His grip on the glass tightened slightly. "Don't I?" She tilted her head, eyes locked on his. "No." "Because I'm standing here with you." And just like that, the tension in his chest eased. The night ended with them in his car, the city lights blurring past. Olivia sat beside him, quiet but not distant. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. She looked down at their joined hands, then back at him. "This is real, isn't it?" she murmured. Caleb didn't hesitate. "Yes," she exhaled, leaning into him slightly. He could feel the shift, the walls coming down, the acceptance settling in. No more hesitations, no more what-ifs, they were in this. And Caleb Weston never lost what he fought for, not when it mattered. And Olivia Carter, she was the only thing that ever had. The moment Olivia stepped into Caleb's penthouse that night, she knew everything had changed. It wasn't just the unspoken understanding that had settled between them after the gala. It wasn't even the way his hand had lingered in hers during the car ride, his grip firm, as if he had no intention of letting go. It was something deeper, something that had been building for months but had finally reached the point of no return. Caleb had always been a man who kept his emotions locked away, but tonight there was no more pretending. The moment the door closed behind them, the world outside ceased to exist. He turned to her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something raw, something unguarded. Olivia held his gaze, waiting, giving him the space to say what she knew he needed to. But instead of speaking, he reached for her, his fingers threading through hers as he pulled her closer. There was no hesitation this time. The kiss was slow, deliberate, as if he was memorizing every second, every breath. Olivia felt the weight of it, the certainty. He wasn't holding back anymore, and neither was she. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his breath unsteady. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself exist in this space, in this moment where nothing else mattered. But reality always had a way of creeping back in. She pulled away slightly, looking up at him. "We have to figure this out." Caleb nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "We will." And for the first time since this had all begun, she actually believed him. The next morning, Olivia woke to the scent of coffee and the distant hum of the city beyond the penthouse windows. She stretched, the events of the previous night replaying in her mind like a dream she wasn't ready to wake up from. But it was real. And now they had to face what came next. She found Caleb in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, a fresh cup of coffee waiting for her on the marble counter. She raised an eyebrow as she took the cup. "Are you trying to impress me?" His smirk was lazy, effortless. "Is it working?" She took a sip, humming in approval. "Maybe." He leaned against the counter, watching her, and for a while they just existed in the quiet. No rush, no expectations, just them. But eventually, reality demanded attention. Olivia set her cup down. "We need to talk about how this is going to work." Caleb's expression didn't change, but she saw the shift in his posture. "I know," he said. "And I've already made my decision." She studied him, waiting. "I don't want to hide this," he admitted. "Not from the people who matter." Her heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. "And the company, I'll handle it." She narrowed her eyes. "Caleb, be serious." "I am," he said, his voice firm. "I'm serious about you." The weight of those words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. She swallowed, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "This isn't just about us. People will talk." His expression darkened slightly. "People will always talk." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I just don't want this to become a scandal." He reached for her hand, his touch grounding. "It won't." She looked up at him, searching for any trace of doubt, but there was none. And slowly, the tension in her chest eased. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting this alone. A week later, the first test of their relationship arrived. Caleb had called a private meeting with the board, a decision that sent murmurs through the office the moment word got out. Olivia kept her head down, focused on her work, but she felt the stares, the curiosity. By the time Caleb emerged from the meeting, his expression was unreadable. She waited until they were alone in his office before speaking. "Well," he sighed, loosening his tie. "It's done." Her stomach twisted. Meaning they know about us," he said simply. "And they know that nothing changes." She blinked. "Just like that." His smirk was sharp. "They don't get a say in my personal life." Relief flooded through her, but there was still a lingering worry. "And the employees? They'll adjust." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, tilting her chin up so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. And just like that, the last of her doubts melted away. The whispers didn't stop overnight, but Olivia didn't care, because Caleb had made his choice, and so had she. Their relationship didn't exist in stolen moments anymore. It wasn't a secret, wasn't something fragile that could break under pressure. It was real, solid. And when Caleb took her hand in his at the next company event, in front of everyone, without hesitation she knew she had made the right choice. Because love wasn't about playing it safe. It was about choosing someone, over and over again. And as Caleb looked at her, his eyes filled with nothing but certainty, she knew this was just the beginning.